Chapter 1. The Wandering Sheep. Shrek was a curious sheep who loved to explore the vast meadows around his pasture. He would often wander off, enjoying the sweet scent of wildflowers and the sound of the birds chirping. His thick and tangled wool made him stand out from the other sheep in the flock, and his unique appearance often attracted attention. One day, Shrek decided to venture out further than he ever had before. He walked for hours, enjoying the scenery around him until he realized that he had no idea where he was. The meadow had turned into dense woods, and he had no idea which way to go to get back to his pasture. As he wandered aimlessly, Shrek began to feel anxious. His wool was so tangled that it made it difficult for him to move around, and he was starting to feel the weight of it on his back. Suddenly, he heard a rustling sound in the bushes nearby, and before he could react, a group of wolves emerged from the foliage. Shrek was terrified and tried to run, but his wool got caught on a branch, and he stumbled, falling to the ground. The wolves were closing in on him, and Shrek thought that this was the end. But then, he heard a voice call out, "Fear not, for I am with you." Shrek looked up and saw a tall man with kind eyes and a gentle smile approaching him. The man picked up Shrek and carried him back to his pasture, all the while comforting him with his words. As they approached the pasture, Shrek's flock of sheep ran towards them, bawing with joy. The shepherd introduced himself to Shrek and the flock and explained that he was a shepherd who had been taking care of sheep all his life. Shrek was amazed by the shepherd's kindness and wanted to follow him wherever he went. The shepherd smiled at Shrek and welcomed him to his flock, promising to take good care of him. As Shrek settled back into the safety of his pasture, he realized that he had learned an important lesson. He had wandered off, not realizing the dangers that lay ahead, but he had been rescued by someone who cared for him, even though he was a stranger. He knew that he had a lot to learn from the shepherd and that he had found a new home amongst his fellow sheep. Chapter 2. The Mischievous Lamb. As Shrek settled into his new home among the shepherd's flock, he quickly made friends with a mischievous lamb named Gizmo. Gizmo was always getting into trouble and loved to play practical jokes on the other sheep. One day, Gizmo convinced Shrek to join him in a prank. They snuck away from the flock and made their way to the edge of the pasture, where there was a small hill that overlooked a nearby town. Gizmo had an idea to use a slingshot to launch a water balloon towards the town and see if they could hit any unsuspecting people. Shrek was hesitant at first, but Gizmo was very persuasive, and soon they were setting up the slingshot. Gizmo carefully aimed the water balloon, and with a flick of his wrist, it went flying towards the town. They both watched in anticipation as the balloon soared through the air, but to their disappointment, it missed its target and landed harmlessly on the ground. As they were about to leave, they heard a voice behind them say, "What are you two doing?" They turned around to see the shepherd standing there with a stern look on his face. Shrek and Gizmo hung their heads in shame as the shepherd scolded them for their reckless behavior. He explained that their prank could have caused harm to innocent people and reminded them that it was not kind to play tricks on others. Shrek felt terrible for what they had done and knew that they had let down the shepherd and the rest of the flock. He apologized to the shepherd and promised that he would never do anything like that again. The shepherd forgave them and reminded them that forgiveness was an important lesson taught in the Bible. He also explained that it was important to always treat others with kindness and respect, just as we would want them to treat us. Shrek realized that he had learned another important lesson, and that was to be responsible for his actions and to think about how they could affect others. He knew that he had a lot more to learn, but he was grateful to have the shepherd to guide him along the way. Chapter 3. The Lost Sheep. As the days went by, Shrek became more and more comfortable in his new home. He loved spending time with his new friends in the flock, and he learned something new from the shepherd every day. But one day, something happened that would test his newfound knowledge and faith. The shepherd had taken the flock out to graze in a nearby meadow when he realized that one of the sheep was missing. It was a little lamb who had wandered off on her own, and the shepherd knew that she could be in danger if she was not found quickly. Without hesitation, The shepherd set out to find the lost lamb, leaving Shrek and the rest of the flock behind. Hours passed, and there was still no sign of the lamb. The sun was beginning to set, and the shepherd knew that he had to find her soon. Shrek watched as the shepherd searched tirelessly for the lost lamb. He could see the worry and concern etched on the shepherd's face, and he knew that this was a critical situation. He felt helpless and wished that there was something he could do to help. As the night began to fall, the shepherd finally spotted the lost lamb. She was stuck in a thicket of thorns and brambles, and the shepherd knew that he had to act quickly to save her. He carefully made his way to the lamb and gently removed the thorns and brambles from her wool. The lamb bleated with relief as the shepherd picked her up and carried her back to the flock. When they arrived back at the pasture, the other sheep cheered and bawed with joy as the shepherd reunited the lost lamb with her mother. Chapter 4. The Shepherd's Sacrifice. One day, a pack of wolves appeared on the outskirts of the pasture. The shepherd knew that the wolves posed a great danger to the flock, and he quickly sprang into action. He gathered the sheep together and began to lead them to safety, but the wolves were fast and cunning, and they soon caught up with them. The shepherd fought bravely to protect his flock, but the wolves were too many, and they began to overwhelm him. In a moment of desperation, the shepherd knew that he had to make a sacrifice to save the sheep. He picked up a lamb and threw it towards the wolves, hoping that they would be distracted enough for him to make his escape. The wolves immediately turned their attention to the lamb, and the shepherd used that opportunity to grab Shrek and run to safety. They ran until they were far enough away from the wolves, and the shepherd sat down, panting heavily. Shrek could see the anguish and pain etched on his face, and he knew that the shepherd had made a great sacrifice to protect them. As they sat there catching their breath, the shepherd explained to Shrek that his sacrifice was an act of love. He knew that the lamb would not survive the attack, but he also knew that he had to do everything in his power to protect the rest of the flock. Shrek was deeply moved by the shepherd's sacrifice, and he realized that it was a reflection of the ultimate sacrifice that Jesus had made for all of humanity. He knew that Jesus had given his life to save others, just as the shepherd had given up the life of the lamb to save the rest of the flock. The shepherd reminded Shrek that sacrifice was an important lesson taught in the Bible. He also explained that it was important to always put the needs of others before our own, just as Jesus had done. Shrek realized that he had learned another valuable lesson, and that was to love others sacrificially. He knew that he had a lot more to learn, but he was grateful to have the shepherd to guide him along the way. As they made their way back to the flock, Shrek looked at the shepherd with a newfound respect and admiration. He knew that the shepherd was truly a selfless and compassionate leader, and he felt blessed to be a part of his flock. Chapter 5. The Good Shepherd. As the days passed, Shrek continued to learn from the shepherd and grow in his understanding of the ways of the flock. He saw firsthand how the shepherd cared for each and every sheep, and how he worked tirelessly to keep them safe and healthy. One day, the shepherd gathered the flock together and began to speak to them about the importance of following him as their leader. He explained that he was the good shepherd, and that his sheep knew his voice and trusted him to lead them to good pastures. Shrek listened carefully as the shepherd spoke, and he realized that the shepherd was not just talking about physical sheep, but about people as well. He understood that the shepherd was talking about the way that Jesus cares for his people and leads them towards eternal life. The shepherd then told a story about a lost sheep who had wandered away from the flock. He explained that the good shepherd would leave the 99 sheep in the pasture and go out to search for the one lost sheep until he found it. Shrek could see the deep love and compassion in the shepherd's eyes as he told the story, and he knew that it was a reflection of the love that Jesus has for each and every one of his people. The shepherd then challenged the flock to listen to his voice and follow him, just as the sheep listen to and follow their shepherd. He reminded them that there are many voices in the world that will try to lead them astray, but that they must trust in the voice of the good shepherd to guide them towards the right path. Shrek felt a deep sense of conviction as he listened to the shepherd's words. He realized that he had not always followed the shepherd's voice, and that he had sometimes wandered off on his own. He felt a deep sense of regret for his past mistakes, but he also knew that he had the opportunity to start afresh and follow the Good Shepherd's voice from that moment forward. As the flock grazed in the pasture, Shrek could feel the warmth of the sun on his back and the gentle breeze on his face. He looked around at the other sheep and realized that he was not alone in his journey. He knew that he had the support and guidance of the shepherd, and that he had a community of fellow believers who would walk alongside him. Shrek felt a deep sense of gratitude for the Good Shepherd and the love that he had shown to him and the rest of the flock. He knew that he had a lot to learn, but he also knew that with the Good Shepherd's guidance, he would be able to grow and thrive in the flock. Epilogue. From that day on, Shrek became the shepherd's faithful companion, following him wherever he went and helping him tend to the flock of sheep. He learned valuable lessons about trust, love, and compassion, and he realized that true happiness comes from serving others. And so, Shrek lived happily ever after, surrounded by the love and care of his shepherd, and he knew that he would never wander away from the safety of his pasture again.